Well, hello everybody, I hope you are all well. Welcome back to another Big Finish Torchwood review. In today's review, I'm going to be taking a look at one of the latest 2022 releases as a part of the Torchwood main range. It is, of course, The Black Knight, as written by Elizabeth Miles. This release is available to order now on the Big Finish website. It can be ordered singularly, either on digital download or physical CD, and you can also purchase this release as part of a bundle with the most recent Torchwood stories. And this range has in fact been very exciting over the past few months. We really have seen some great stories, likes of the Red List with Mr. Colchester, the Grey Mare in December, and then of course Caddock Point earlier this year as well. So The Black Knight does of course see the return of Samuel Barnett as good old Norton Folgate, who did of course originally appear within the main range story Goodbye Piccadilly, and has subsequently seen releases as a part of the Torchwood Soho range, as well as the Torchwood continuation series being Gods Among Us. The Black Knight is another one of those rather adventurous Torchwood stories where we start to see the range doing something a little bit different. This time around to taking a look at the space race, and we have of course humanity venturing out into low Earth orbit. Now of course I'm going to be drawing parallels throughout this review to the previous main range story Empire of Shadows, which did of course see the Torchwood archive in the far future. So we're not necessarily going as far out into space as the previous Torchwood spacey story. However, it is still a very different release to usual. Torchwood once more voyages into space in The Black Knight, written by Elizabeth Miles. This story is right up my street, delving into the period of the space race and humanity's first steps into outer space. Last year, I did in fact take a look at the Sixth Doctor story The Space Race as part of the 1963 main range trilogy, so I was really excited to see Big Finish once more venturing into this territory of history, after previously really adoring that story. It's exciting seeing the Doctor Who universe embrace space travel in a less sci-fi timey-wimey angle. The Black Knight opens with multiple failed attempts at missions, and a disgruntled government cutting the funding. It's nice to have a realistic environment story blended into space travel. It's also a great niche seeing this story tackling the space race from the perspective of the British Empire, rather than the more common angle focusing on America and the USSR. If you are a fan of technological advances in stories, The Black Knight will be right up your street, especially given that in reality in the future there are plans to make a British-based space programme, and it'll be interesting to see if that gets budget cuts. It most probably will. Lynn Sharman is the lead of the mission, and she's frankly at the end of her tether. With missions going wrong despite her immense planning, her dreams of space are practically over, until a mysterious figure with access to technology and money steps in to help. I really loved hearing about Lynn's character, her passion for space exploration, and the determination to succeed. She's a woman at the top of her game, but is still being overlooked and downtrodden by the male-dominated field that she finds herself within. Had this story been slightly longer, I'd have loved to see some flashbacks into Lynn's life, maybe presenting the genesis of her love for space and her days at university, or maybe even her watching TV programmes involving space as a child. That would be quite a clever way to maybe even add in a classic Doctor Who reference, like they did within Remembrance of the Daleks. That said, I thought what we did get to see from her character was excellent, a very well-rounded character that I felt like I knew from listening to this story. I thoroughly enjoyed hearing the story from her experiences and making the mission really come alive, especially when she embarks on her own search for a mysterious energy source in space. Without a doubt, Norton Folgate is one of Big Finish's crowning achievements when it comes to the Torchwood series. He always makes an impact. Samuel Barnett is an absolute joy to listen to, and it was a delight seeing him return for yet another story. This certainly isn't the style of story that I expect to see Norton within, especially when you compare this to the likes of Torchwood Soho. This release is very different. There certainly isn't as much joking and sexual tension, probably because Andy isn't around, but what we do get is Norton doing his own thing. He provides Lynn a helping hand, whilst the story doesn't quite reveal what is actually going on. And for those of you who have listened to previous Norton Folgate stories, there is of course always something going on. Norton is basically his own Torchwood department, as only he knows what's going on in his own little world. I love how Elizabeth incorporates the themes of humanity being ready for space or not. Are we or aren't we? This episode is set in the 50s, so technology isn't as advanced as compared to now, but it still raises questions on ultimately what our dent in the universe will be. This is delightfully personified between the main characters, Norton, a mysterious outsider, Lynn, a pioneer for passion of future space endeavours, and Freddie, a man who longs for the days of the British Empire. Freddie is an interesting addition as he pretty much encapsulates the stereotype that Lynn is trying to move humanity away from, or the same people who've been stopping her get her success throughout her life. But because they are a part of the same team, I think there is a little bit of loyalty between them. As the story progresses, we see Elizabeth use an existing element of space to build her story, being the Black Knight. Her writing style really made the environment feel alien and uncertain, which added to the story's mystery. I think out of all the Torchwood main range stories that I've listened to, even the likes of Empire of Shadows, which naturally is also set in space, this Torchwood story does feel a bit more like Doctor Who than Torchwood, but that said, it does still feature some adult material that will not be suitable for the younger listener. It's an interesting blend between the two worlds. Without revealing anything other than my own compliments, the ending scene is brilliant. It's hard-hitting, emotional, and summarises both humanity and Torchwood's aims. If you like other Norton stories, don't go in expecting the same style of adventure, but some of those core roots are still present within this story, just in a very different environment. I really enjoyed Torchwood: The Dark Knight. It's an eventful, self-contained drama with some incredibly strong character writing. Elizabeth Miles is quickly making a firm place within the Big Finish catalogue, penning this story, as well as the rather popular 7th Doctor adventure, Grey Man on the Mountain, which I reviewed a few years ago and can recall enjoying also. With adventures featuring the 1st and 4th Doctors on the way, as well as the War Master, I can't wait to see what Elizabeth Miles does next. But overall for this story, a really interesting adventure, certainly one for the Norton Folgate fans, but also a perfect story for those listeners who want to hear something different from the Torchwood main range that kind of strays into similar territory of that of a Doctor Who story. And also, if you're a little bit of a physics or space nerd, kind of like myself, of course studying basically and doing a space law dissertation at the minute, then again, this story will very much be for you, focusing on humanity and the more practical exploration of space. Overall, I think something that the Black Knight does very well is generally being accessible. I don't think you have to be a Torchwood fan in order to enjoy this story, and equally, to be honest, you don't even need to be a Doctor Who fan, because I think this episode is such good traditional sci-fi, because it is playing with that concept of essentially humanity's amateur space travel, and that is embedded throughout the entirety of this plot. You feel like you are going on this mission with these humans, and they don't particularly know what they're going to bump into. They don't know what is around the corner, and you get that sense of the unknown throughout this story. Even throughout this review, I want to mention in particular what goes on in the later half, but because this episode is 1 hour long, I need to be very careful with what I say with Torchwood reviews, because before long you are revealing the entirety of the plot. But what I will say with this story is you get that idea of humanity venturing out into space, but equally perhaps the universe looking in on humanity as well. As I've mentioned throughout this review, that whole concept of, are humans ready? Of course, within the TV show, we have that whole thing of the 21st century is where everything changes, and you've got to be ready. So then we've got an episode set within the past that is questioning that readiness. I think that is a way to kind of intersect the Torchwood themes throughout this story with an intriguing character, the likes of Norton Folgate, who is interesting. As I've mentioned throughout this review, he's quite ambiguous, you don't know what he's thinking. I think that this story does certainly play down some of those more comedic elements that you get to see within the likes of Torchwood Soho, and certainly you get to see him being more his vanilla self when he's trying to keep a low profile, perhaps. Yes, overall for The Black Knight as a story, I really did enjoy it if you're a fan of venturing into space. And an episode that is a little bit more close to home when it comes to space travel, this episode is very much for you. But also if you're looking for a Torchwood story that's a bit different in theme, that isn't set on Earth, this is something again that I recommend worth considering. Certainly if you've listened to Empire of Shadows and enjoyed it, I imagine you will most probably enjoy this story as well. Thank you very much for watching this review. I really hope you have enjoyed it. Do of course stay tuned on The Host Productions for regular Big Finish audio drama reviews. And of course on that note, have a nice day. I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.